Now the story of a wealthy family who lost everything, and the one son who had no choice but to keep them all together. It's Arrested Development.
Hey folks, welcome to the Salty Seaman Military Media Bullshit. Today we're talking about one of my favorite shows of all time that does have a military bend to it. So I figured I'll do a couple episodes just covering the military part of it, maybe occasionally commenting on the regular show itself. You're not familiar with this show. Arrested Development was a show from the early 2000s that was kind of a groundbreaking show. It was the first show really to, not the first, but one of the ones really to take advantage of the faux documentary style. Or as opposed to a traditional comedy, this is more of it done in a documentary style, including a narrator, found footage, flashbacks to other things that explain the plot. It ends up being a fairly... the show for sure can get really complicated and require you to, pay attention for a lot of the references, backflashes, just how the story comes together. The show is, in my mind, infinitely funnier on rewatches because, as funny as it is the first time, going back and seeing how they, just how brilliantly they set up a lot of the things and everything's thought about ahead of time, really makes the show work for me, along with, clever dialogue writing, great scripts, great production for what it is, and, of course, the cast. In this case, we're mostly focusing on the character of Buster Bluth. Buster is... Well, let's give the whole family backstory real quick. It's, as the announcement, the beginning of the show tells you, it's a family that lost everything and is trying to get everything together. It's basically a rich, spoiled family who faces hard times when the patriarch ends up going to jail for various crimes, and that plot line alone gets twisted, changed, and adds a lot different layers as the show goes on.
There's a good chance I may have committed some light treason.
And it continues on through the rest of the season. But what we're looking at is, not only the crazy matriarch and patriarch, who are great characters, but the rest of their family, particularly the kids. You have Michael, who's who's probably the most sane of the group, trying to hold it together. You have Job, the oldest and often most spoiled, Lindsay, who's in a loveless marriage, who's constantly trying to prove herself and rebel. And you have little Buster Bluth, the youngest and the most arrested development of the kids, who has, spent most of his life as being a mama's boy, owns about 30 bachelor's degrees in various weird things, including, we found out early on, cartography, which is, of course, great. But, as the show, as the family starts to get more and more political pressure, basically... the matriarch gets approached by a Michael Moore XP, about the war. This is the time when the Gulf War, Iraq and Afghanistan, those were both heating up, and gets kind of ambushed by fake Michael Moore, and is like, well, would you ever put your kids in harm's way if you support all this stuff? Because the family's dealings were
some light treason.
Dealing with Saddam Hussein, and then she says, yes, of course, which she says out of, a basic, like, of course I would, but she knows, or, truthfully, and of course the show plays with it, Buster is completely unqualified to join the military. But what turns out, he does, and not as an officer, as a, enlisted basic soldier. And because, the show takes liberties with, what the military would and would not allow even in times of war. But giving us times of war, they're like, yeah, we'll take anything. And, basically they overlook all of Buster's problems, and he does end up in the Army. So, well, this review, we will go through at least the first two seasons. If there's any, I don't think there's a whole lot of military stuff going on in fourth and fifth. So, if this goes long, we might separate this into two parts. But for now, I'm just going to focus on Buster and his military career and plot line as it goes along in the show.
Fine, but Rock sinks boat.
Michael,
Mom, I'm right in the middle of something. Get rid of the C word.
I'll leave when I'm good and ready.
Just FYI, this one just happens to be one of my absolute favorite lines from the show.
At that moment, Buster was taking his physical at the recruitment center.
Hole in my heart. I've never opened my eyes underwater. My, is shaped like, but without its shell. Ew. I guess I have the panic attacks under control. Oh, and I'm legally blind at night.
But Buster had miscalculated the Army's current need for personnel.
Okay then, let's get you fitted for a uniform.
What?
Of course, as funny as it all is, yes, you do not go and get fitted for your uniform after you give your medical history background to the doctor at MEPS. But it is funny.
They're taking me in the Army. They didn't think there was enough wrong with me.
Well, did they check everything?
Yes, they even touched my Charlie Browns. You lied to me. You said I wasn't fit to serve.
Let's calm down, people.
And Buster saw the chance to get injured enough to keep him out of the Army.
Yeah, solid plan. Obviously, they're not going to take you if you've been seriously injured by a giant wall falling on you, but poor Buster is doomed to come into the Arrested Development version of the Army.
Get me out. You've got to get me out.
Well, I'm headed down to Mexico to try to find Dad, but when I get back, maybe we'll try to figure something out.
And that's when Buster decided to sneak into Mexico to avoid the service.
Oh, no, I think it'll be worked out by then.
Of course, Buster is not obligated to go in. He can quit anytime before boot camp. The implication here is like he is not willing to quit, and Lucille is not willing to let him quit because they're in kind of this family feud over it. But yeah, honestly, Buster doesn't have to escape to Mexico. He doesn't have to get himself injured. He just said, no, I don't want to do it. Given his long history of ailments, obviously he shouldn't be allowed to do it. But it allows the show to kind of show just how, Arrested Development these characters are. They don't understand how the Army works. They don't understand how military service works. Buster obviously has no idea, and we'll see more of that the more the show goes on, of how very unprepared and zero idea how actually the military or the Army works.
What are you doing home?
The Army had half a day.
I always like the idea that the Army as a whole just had a half day. Now, the main joke here is that Buster has joined the Army, and his mom doesn't know about it, so he's, coming up with excuses. Of course, showing how oblivious and just short-sighted the family are. They don't question that he doesn't go to disappear for a couple months to boot camp. He doesn't, have a fresh haircut. There's nothing about it, because they're all. It's a group of self-absorbed people. So yeah, in reality, this guy who suddenly decided to join the Army, never, had any official boot camp, never did this and that. Of course, is ridiculous. But in the context of this show, it actually makes sense just because of the selfishness and self-absorbed of their family. Like, they don't even think about it. How it would logistically work if Buster was actually joined the Army. Of course, this is not even close to regulation. It is actually going out of its way to, point out how ridiculous it is, because he's faking being in the Army, and he got an Army outfit from his brother, who got it from a stripper. But it also goes along to show the family's oblivious to what Buster's actually doing, or they know he's lying, and they are just putting up with it because they just don't care enough. But no, not an actual uniform hit, though, with this show. When he actually does go into the Army, we will start to get those. Buster finally in the Army, wearing a outdated uniform for the early 2000s. Not bald, and the joke is like this become a kinder, gentler boot camp due to lawsuits and the pussification PC of America, blah blah blah. It's all part of the parody that is the show. But even with all that said, just the utter ridiculousness of Buster's boot camp is part of the fun of the show. Steve Holt. Buster gets to go home because he cannot accomplish the obstacle course, which is totally normal part of Army boot camp. So we tie up the Buster not being able to get over the obstacle course wall in boot camp with a scene where they are getting ready to ship out over new evidence of weapons of mass destruction. Again, the show all ties back into the early Iraq War. And of course, the very idea, like, is like, well, you can't do the obstacle course, so you can just go home during the parts of boot camp you don't like, which is part of the show's humor. And due to Job's incessant bullying, Buster finally gets over the wall and is about to get shipped out to Iraq, as the show shows us, under false pretenses, because the map they're looking at, if you now watch the show, is Tobias's balls. I'll just leave it at that. Tiny minor thing, why is the Marine who's giving the information to about the balls landscape in full dress? There's nobody in the Pentagon that walks around in full dress blues. I think he would either be in Charlie's or, if not, fatigues. So yes, just another little fun little bit of things not true. Also, of course, the Army mistaking balls for an actual landscape of Iraq with weapons of mass destruction. Again, the show's not serious. I'm not serious about it. Anyway, I think I'll stop right here. I think it's a good little primer on, just before we get into Buster truly being in the Army and having a lot of fun with that. We'll leave this as the primer, and I will hopefully be looking to get back to another episode of Arrested Development soon. Unfortunately, a couple of things coming in between that, including my now annual operation, or I should say, my annual Hallmark military BS movie. Not my most popular ones, but man, they really hate it when I review their movies. So screw them. I will, in fact, keep reviewing their movies because they're awful and stupid and embarrassing to anyone who actually served. And that's just talking about the military side. So that's probably coming up next for your holiday season. Maybe one more little mini episode, just some Christmas in the military stuff I can find for fun, and then we'll probably get back to Arrested Development. Anyway, that is all the Salty Seaman has for you, freaks. Peace.